Time. Laura and Bill are back. Jackie Austin in the building.
We're here.
I haven't been
On the
here.
camera.
I haven't been here for 3 weeks.
You haven't?
No, I wasn't here last week or the week before.
Okay.
I was shut out.
Poor thing.
Well, you're back now.
Well,
I am.
today's show should be interesting.
Back with a vengeance.
Really? Today's show?
Yeah, not that it isn't always interesting, but lately I've run into permitting issues when selling houses or dealing with houses.
Okay.
And so I thought it'd be a really good topic because municipalities have seen a reduction in revenues, and some of them are getting pretty aggressive with enforcing permits. So if there's a township, I was teaching a class in Kalamazoo, and there's a township over there that there's a realtor that feeds the building inspector new listings, and what that building inspector does is look to see if there's a finished basement or that says new kitchen, new bathroom, something like that. Then he compares it to their records, and if there are no permits pulled, he knocks on the door, and then stuff happens.
That's wrong.
What's wrong?
I don't like that.
I don't
What?
even worry about it from the municipality side. I worry about it more from the purchaser and seller side and the sale of real estate where improvements were made without permits. Also worry about in terms of insurance issues, casualty insurance, and
Yeah, I had one of our inspectors say that.
May I finish?
Yeah, but I just wanted to add, I had one of our city inspectors mention
Forgive me for talking while you're interrupting.
that a lot of insurance companies are now requiring the permits, so.
Well, that's what I was just about to say, but, so you said it, that's good. All right.
Okay.
So, but I don't even worry about it from municipal enforcement, that's not the issue as far as I'm concerned. Sales, and then liability are the two things that I worry about.
Yeah, but in municipal enforcement, it's this one particular house that I'm told had a finished basement without permits pulled. The inspector found out, went over, and the new buyer ended up having to tear the basement apart and
Why?
cost the new buyer over $40,000.
Why?
Because the improvements were made without a permit, and the fact that the buyer didn't make them does not all of a sudden grandfather them in. I mean, this happens all the time. I've got an issue going on right now where property was illegally filled. This happens all the time too. Property illegally filled. The DEQ comes in and says to the new buyer, no permit was issued for it. We know you didn't do it. However, it's still a violation of in this case, it would be Part 303 of the Michigan Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. You're either going to have to pull it out, seller's going to have to pull it out, and what we end up doing is we end up going after the seller, or to get it removed and get a permit, or to leave it in place, or to rescind the deal. Same thing is true on a violation of a building code. You do it without a permit, you buy that property. If it's discovered that it was done without a permit, it gets yanked, or you get what's called an ATF, an after the fact permit. The problem is it's been finished. They can't inspect the rough electric or the rough plumbing. You got to rip out the walls in order to be able to do the inspection. So I always tell people, in the old 20 years ago, people didn't worry about this as much. Now you really worry about it.
Can you go back on the previous?
Of
owner?
course, absolutely, because the seller's disclosure statement in a residential deal, there's a specific section, pre-printed section on it that says, are all improvements done with appropriately issued permits? And if the seller says yes, and it turns out later on that that's false, that's a fraudulent statement. The purchaser could go after the seller for fraud. So the seller has to be very careful in terms of filling out the disclosure statement. If they remodeled a den, they remodeled the basement, they did it with their brother-in-law or whoever it is, and they didn't get the appropriate permits, and if they put yes, all appropriate permits were issued, that's fraud.
What if they don't know? What if they hire a professional contractor and the contractor doesn't pull the permit?
Well, that's not, if the seller doesn't know, the seller's disclosure statement is based upon the knowledge of the seller. So if the seller's contractor failed to get the permits, they can go after the contractor, but I want you to understand that as far as the municipality is concerned, it doesn't matter whether the contractor neglected to do so or the owner neglected to do so, it's the owner's ultimate responsibility. And the permit actually is done by the contractor, but on behalf of the owner.
So I just had a transaction in one of our neighboring townships here that the property had to be connected to sewer and water, or had to be connected to sewer because the septic failed. So the person, the company hired to do the connection, pulled the permits. The local municipality went to do their inspection and noticed that there was other work done. And at that point, it triggered a problem for the seller. It's already closed. So we're now dealing with this, and the municipality is not allowing the buyer to move in until final inspections are done.
What
Permits
is that?
are pulled and inspections are done.
Bill, what does that mean to pull a permit, and why do you have to do it?
Pulling a permit simply means that it's issuance by the municipality. It's just a term of
So they're
art.
giving you permission.
Yeah, you have to get a permit in order to do certain improvements, and really, you have to look to the state building code. Every local municipality has to adopt, at a minimum, the state building code. And the state building code is a thick treatise that details all of the types of improvements to real property that must be permitted by the municipality, because the local municipality either has its own building department, or in smaller townships or even smaller municipalities, if they don't have a building department, they defer to the county building department. Every county has a building department. You have to go, if it's required under the building code, that there be a permit for the work, and that's virtually all electrical work, all plumbing work, certain remodeling, all mechanical work, and you have to go to the municipality, present your plans, the specifications for what it is you're proposing to do. Local building department will tell you the permits that are necessary in order to do that work. What will happen then is you'll get the permit issued, you pay the permit fee, get the permit issued, and then at various stages, the contractor or the owner can do the work him or herself if they are
But I don't think they
qualified
can
to do
do
so.
all.
Not all of it, not
Okay.
electrical, plumbing, et cetera. Somebody's got to sign off. But they can do the work themselves if it's their own residence. They then go in and at appropriate stages in the construction, rough electrical, rough plumbing, to get an inspector from the county building department or the local building department to come out and inspect it to make certain that it is done in accordance with the building codes. It gets signed off at that point, and then you now do the remaining work, finish it off, and you get a final permit after all final punch list items are done with respect to the building code, and at that point, you now have a finished product. But it's in compliance with all codes.
And a lot of people avoid the permits because they think they're too expensive. But I can guarantee you it's more expensive to fix the problem after the fact. And
Are the permits a
municipalities are
money
just-
grab?
No, not at all. I don't.
Are they expensive?
No, they're not that expensive, and it'll be based upon the amount, the value of the improvements that are being made.
And it's gonna depend what you have done.
It's a nominal cost, it really is, and it's not a profit center for the municipality at all. It's intended to be able to pay for the appropriate inspections by the inspectors. And I say this, it's in connection with, if you want to sell your property later on, you're now giving the seller's disclosure statement. It's vital that you, as an owner of property and as a potential seller of the property, make certain that the appropriate permits are there, because you're going to have to represent that they were there, and if you don't, it's fraud. Second, if you do this work on your own and it's not up to code, there's now a fire, for example, and it develops that the fire was caused by the non-permitted work, develops that the non-permitted work was not done appropriately, was not done by a qualified contractor, etc. Now your liability for death or injury to whoever was killed or injured by that casualty, it goes up exponentially.
Or you may not get a claim. They may not pay on the claim if it was caused within a certain feet.
Yeah, the insurance companies are getting much more, they're scrutinizing much more carefully whether or not improvements are being done in accordance with appropriately issued permits, and by qualified contractors too. I mean, you can get contractors, if you get a contractor that comes in and says, oh, we're just gonna do this without telling the municipality, we're gonna do it without doing permits, or I'll do it after my ordinary 8 to 5 job, I'll come out in the evenings and do it. You're making a huge mistake, I think, as a homeowner.
Well, and a lot of times the contractors will say, well, here's what it costs, and if we pull permits, then the permits cost this, and they let the property owner make the decision on whether or not they pull permits, and to me, that's probably shouldn't even be an option.
Well,
The licensed contractor-
reputable, you have Article 24 of the Michigan Occupational Code that licenses residential builders. Now, as a commercial builder, you don't have to be licensed, but we're talking about residences here. If you're hiring a contractor, you make certain that the contractor is properly licensed. Electricians have to be licensed, plumbers have to be licensed, mechanical contractors have to be licensed, residential builders have to be licensed. You make certain that they are appropriately licensed through the department, now the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Agency. And any reputable contractor will not try to
Give you the
circumvent the permit process, because what happens is
Right.
if they do that, they'll lose their license to practice the occupation.
Now, the other thing I found out is it's the contractor's responsibility to call the municipality and say, come and check for rough inspection, or come and check for final. And property I'm writing an offer on in Washtenaw County, I pulled the records, and they put in a new furnace, pulled the permit, it's final. Put in air conditioning, pulled a permit, it's finaled out. There was one other thing, and they pulled permits final. They pulled a permit for electric 100 amp service. They pulled a permit for concrete work and for roofing that are not final, but they did this.
By
in-
final, she means final inspection from the municipality,
Right,
the appropriate inspector.
Right, and this was done in 2001.
You're
Is
good.
that something that the buyer needs to worry about since it is so old?
This leads into the next thing. As a buyer of any property, one of the first things I would do is I would go to the local building department and have them pull the records. You typically don't need a Freedom of Information Act request, just go down there. They might tell you to come back when they pull the records if they're in storage or archived somewhere. But you go down to the local building department and you find out what they have. In that circumstance, where the permit was lifted in 2001, and now in 2014, I wish you a lot of luck trying to track that down and get a final for it. You at least try, you go to the municipality, they'll probably throw up their hands and say, we don't know, and they may say, we don't care at that point, because it's
Right.
13 years old. So now, unless the work wasn't done, I mean, you've got an issue, but it's not, it should be,
not as
it should
big
be
of an issue.
solvable, right? It
Right,
should be
especially
solvable.
because the permit was actually pulled.
Right.
So what if you finish your basement? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't do any electrical, you don't do any mechanical.
You
don't
just
do-
put drywall on?
You don't do any plumbing.
You'd have to check the building code to see whether or not the work that you are doing, irrespective of electrical, plumbing, and mechanical, requires a permit, and it may.
I think it
may.
does.
Simply, yeah, if you were doing an addition, definitely. If you're doing repairs, most repairs, no. But if you're finishing off a basement, my bet is, irrespective of
because
doing
it's below
mechanical, et
grade.
cetera, you're gonna have to get a permit. They also wanna make sure that the materials you're using are appropriate materials. You're not putting up flammable materials when a non-flammable material is to be used.
So then, that also brings me to, we'll talk about the city, for example. They're doing property inspections every 2 years on non-owner occupied rental properties. We had to replace, or are in the process of replacing, a water heater, and it was suggested to me that we just do it, and I said, well, that's just stupid, because they're first of all, you need to pull a permit, but second of all, they're inspecting every 2 years, and the city will, if you do not pull a permit, I know that the city will make you, in 2 years, if they inspect and see no permit was pulled for that water heater, for example, they'll make it to that day's standard. So if there's a change in the code, then you have additional costs of bringing that water heater to current code.
But again, I think that's irrelevant, because from an owner, a rental property owner's perspective, if I do work without getting the appropriate permit, there now is a fire, there's now an explosion from a gas leak from the water heater being installed. the lawyer who represents the injured or killed individual, first thing they're gonna do is look to see whether or not a permit was properly issued and whether the work was done by a qualified contractor. And if not, as a property owner, you're toast. That's a legal term of art, by the way. You're toast. Yeah.
And there's landlords that actually put in their own furnaces.
Sure.
That just blows my mind.
Well,
That seems like one of the most complicated, deadly
But,
items
but,
that
you know,
you
but,
could
but
put
most
in.
people take an approach that it's not going to happen to me. And to most of them, it never happens. In other words, the fact that the work is done doesn't result in an injury, so what they're doing is playing the odds. The unfortunate thing for many people is that playing the odds just doesn't work, and they end up having that death or injury or damage that either causes them personal liability or is not covered by insurance, so they suffer the property damage loss. I mean, they're real reasons why these codes exist. And look, I'm represent owners. I don't represent any municipalities, but I think that the owner has as much incentive as the municipality to make certain that things are done properly, even more. Dead silence. Okay.
I was thinking.
That's called thinking real estate, so that's pretty good. Yeah,
Right,
Were
exactly.
were you thinking about
appropriate.
real estate, or were you thinking about something else? Oh, boy.
Well, and I think a lot of times the property owner, I call the seller on this property in Washington County, actually is the realtor, and I called him and I said, do you know that you have these 3 open permits? He had no clue because he had hired it done. So a lot of times the property owner has no idea
Yeah,
that
I
the
think
permits
that.
were needed, 1, and then 2 that you have to call for final. Someone has to call for final inspections.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that tie that into you as a realtor and other realtors, when you get contacted by a seller to list the seller's property, one of the questions ought to be when they say, hey, look, I just put on a new deck, I put on a new porch, we redid the master bathroom, is to say to the seller, did you get the appropriate permits issued, who did the work, etc. Because a diligent purchaser is going to ask those questions, and we need to anticipate those. And if permits were not issued, I'm here to tell you, as you're filling out the seller's disclosure statement, you're going to have to disclose that no appropriate permit was issued.
I wonder if home inspectors should be noting that also.
They do. Home inspector.
they note it?
Oh, they check the municipal, a competent, a qualified home inspector is checking with the municipality to verify that appropriate permits were issued. And if one isn't, they'll note it on the report.
So in this
so
case,
new furnace?
You advertise a new furnace, you have to get a permit for the installation of the new furnace. Building inspector notes that it's a new furnace. A good building inspector will also be or building inspector, excuse me, for purposes of sale, not a municipal building inspector, will also check the municipal records. Yeah, I closed,
Shocked.
no, I closed a couple properties in Ann Arbor not long ago, and that shows up on the inspection report. Now, these were commercial rental properties, but he still went down and checked the municipal records.
what if the municipality has changed how they maintain their records?
Oh,
Like I know
that-
City of Ann Arbor has.
City of Ann Arbor's lost a ton of records. I've been in municipalities where they either misplaced the records or they were destroyed in a fire. I mean, at that point, you don't know. But
It
you
is what it is.
you do the best that you can. I mean, I did a large closing on office buildings yesterday over in Troy, and we weren't so concerned about the condition of the building, but the purchasers doing due diligence. These are a couple lawyers who were purchasers, and they were also representing themselves. But they did a good job of doing that, and they ended up working with their lender. They had to get letters from the township verifying that what the zoning was, that the use was within the zoning, and that the buildings, et cetera, met the zoning requirements with respect to setbacks, height, et cetera. So, I mean, these are things that a purchaser exercising due diligence is going to do. A lot of times you get stupid purchasers. That also is a legal term of art.
You get but you hire a good buyer agent, right?
But no, you get stupid purchasers who will then collude with or conspire with the seller. I'll sit there and say, well, we didn't get a permit lifted for this, but not to worry, et cetera. And as a result, we'll cut a better deal, whatever it is. for a purchaser to do that or not to do the due diligence is absolutely silly.
It'll probably end up costing more.
What can a homeowner do after, I guess after the fact, if the,
Well, if you've done some
contractor-
work,
to
well,
me,
if
the
you,
contractor's not doing his due diligence, and then
Yeah, well, one problem
probably
is
many times the homeowner is,
homeowner
screwed.
stuff, yeah, because the work may have been done 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
Statute of
So what do you
limitations
do?
has run. There's another legal term of art called SOL, called sure on luck.
but currently, I mean, you
Yeah,
can always
that-
get a copy of their permit, their builder's permit,
Yeah, but I
or
mean,
builder's
but-
license, I'm
Yeah, but
sorry.
Greg's comment is, it's done.
Right.
Now, how do I resolve it later on?
maybe 3 years later.
As a purchaser, all I can do is now with the
No, he's
home,
talking about as a seller.
as the owner, as a seller,
Yeah.
and I find out the statute of limitations may have run, there may be a limitation in the contractor's contract that shortens that
Yeah,
period.
but can you call the municipality and say, hey, I'm getting ready to list my house and the realtor told me that we should have had permits pulled and I'm finding out we
I'm
don't?
not about to tell you to contact the municipality at that point, because you may be creating more of a can of worms. What you may want to do is get a good home inspector in there, verify that the work was done in accordance with building codes, going back and trying to rectify it. I don't know, I'm not prepared to give advice over the radio on that one. I'd want to know the specific facts, I'd want to talk to the purchaser, I'd want to know exactly what was going on.
Well, we have to wrap it up. So
That was interesting, though.
thanks for coming back to the
For a
show.
for a change.
I learned something today.
You don't need a permit to do flowers.
Oh, thank you.
I have a new listing at 740 West Washington. It is a nice 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, over 1,700 square foot house.
Has it been inspected?
It was when they bought it. 84.9,
Wow.
and it's right there on that alley that goes up to the First Presbyterian Church, right off of West Washington, close to where I live. So I'd say it's
Be
a
a
great
neighbor.
area.
Yeah,
Good
well,
neighbors.
it's good neighbors, yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
good neighbors.
exactly.
Yeah, 740 West Washington, 84.9. And call me. I'd love to show you homes and sell you one or get your home sold for you. 780-3800.